Thank you all for tuning in to the SMT Mobile Tech Podcast. This is the podcast for the week of July 29th, 2018. This is podcast number 5 in the series, and I have a bunch of topics that I want to cover with you all today. But before I proceed, let me go ahead and give a shout out to the Patreon page for SMT Mobile Tech. You can check it out in the link in the description below. You can get access to a lot of publicly available videos, as well as if you decide to support the Patreon page, you can get access to all the exclusive content that doesn't find its way onto anything else except exclusively on Patreon. So definitely check that out if you get the opportunity. Also, there's a link in the description below if you'd like to make a PayPal donation to the channel. Greatly appreciated for that. Now let's go ahead and proceed with the podcast. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take probably about a handful or so of topics that I want to go into great detail and just kind of comb through them, go through all of the actual factuals, and then kind of give you my take or my opinion on those particular subjects. Some are just kind of informative and other things are more interesting. There's some hardware release information, some carrier information, some network and 5G technological things in there. So let me just go ahead and get started with the first thing, which is coming from Verizon. Verizon is now offering a new VPN service. For those of you that are not sure what a VPN is, it stands for a virtual private network. Basically, what Verizon wants to offer is a service that makes your connectivity to public Wi-Fi is completely safe. What it does is it's going to basically encrypt the data that your cell phone is transmitting and receiving, and basically keep you anonymous while you're using public Wi-Fis. So it'll basically keep you secure, keep any type of hacking or malware or any malicious activity from going on during your connection. So it's really useful when you're using public Wi-Fi. Now it basically offers anonymous browsing, no concerns there, no tracking. There's going to be ad blocking, so things of that nature, and it keeps you protected from phishing attempts and installation of malicious programs and software and stuff like that. So there's many paid options out there. You can go to the App Store or go to the Google Play Store, and you can download a VPN from a number of different providers. There's free VPNs, there's paid VPNs. I always recommend the paid VPNs. But if you wanted to see what a VPN is like and you never have before, there are many free versions, and Verizon is now offering their own paid version of this service. Now, this kind of does raise some questions. We all question our carriers from time to time, and I see the reason for having this, trying to secure devices when they're on public Wi-Fi networks, but I feel like it's almost kind of like a conflict of interest for Verizon. Why is Verizon really offering this in particular? I'm not really sure. It's a good question. I think that, Verizon probably actually wants to collect their user data. They want to know what apps they're using, what they're doing while on those apps, what type of traffic, web traffic they have, and where they're headed to and what they see, so that they can target, advertising and change their revenue streams and things of that nature. So it seems like a conflict of interest, at least on the surface level. And people are going to question this. I think it's pretty obvious in this case. So why exactly are they trying to divert the traffic? Why are they trying to reduce the ad tracking and things of that nature? I'm just not really sure. So, what VPNs do in all essence is they're rerouting your traffic and your data so that it can't be tracked, and they're keeping the connection secure. This actually kind of goes against what Verizon wants to do, because what Verizon does is Verizon often will throttle data speeds when it comes to video resolution. So for those of you that have any of the Verizon Unlimited plans, that your video speeds get throttled all the time. So you're restricted to 720p and 480p depending on your plan. And if you're using a VPN, it bypasses that. So it would give you full HD video. It would get you quad HD, whatever your device can actually render on its display. It'll stream the video that way. So in other words, it uncaps the throttling for the video resolution. So it just seems kind of weird that they're doing this. Now, I'm not sure if in particular the Verizon version of the VPN is going to unthrottle the video, but I know all of the VPNs will, because they route the data as just regular data, not video data. So I'd want to see it. I'd want to test it. I think I'm going to give this a shot to see what kind of happens. I want to see if it removes that video throttling feature, And if it does, I mean, that's kind of in and of itself worth it, because getting 1080p, I think it requires a special fee that they place onto their above unlimited plan, which is like an additional $10 fee per month. The VPN would be worth it just in that, because the VPN service is $4. It's $3.99. So, and not only that, but you'd also be getting the protection from, encrypting the device and securing the connection and stuff like that. So, I don't know. They're saying that this is bank-grade encryption. So if it is indeed that effective, this could be useful to somebody. I'm not sure if people want their VPN service through Verizon, through their provider, but VPNs are useful, and here's Verizon offering the service. So in the comment section below, let me know what you guys think of this service, if you're interested in it, if you're on Verizon, or if not, tell me why. It'd be interesting to hear what you guys have to say. So I'm going to go ahead and transition now to some AT&T news. What we have from AT&T is the DOJ, the Department of Justice, is asking the courts to reveal very sensitive conference transcripts from the court proceedings for the AT&T and Time Warner merger meetings that they had. I think what the DOJ wants to see is they want to be able to see what exactly was said during those conversations between opposing counsels and the judge who was seeing the case. What's kind of interesting about the conversations that were going on is apparently during the proceedings there were conversations that were occurring, but I think there was like white noise being played in the background that was distracting people and preventing them from being able to eavesdrop and hear what was being said between counsel and the judge. So, people want to know what was being said, what was being discussed, and if it has implications to potentially stop the merger, or not the merger, the acquisition from happening between Time Warner and AT&T. So during those proceedings, with that implication of that white noise, they're thinking this could be, on the grounds of like an antitrust thing. So, under anti-competitive terms is what's being questioned for the Time Warner acquisition. And you think about the pay-for-TV market, and you think about cable, and you think about all the channels and all the lineups that different companies offer. This makes AT&T very, very powerful in terms of the pricing and what they want to offer in terms of packages, and they would control a very large portion of the market. So as it relates to consumers, this is a really, really important thing when it comes to TV. Now, in 2016, I remember Don Trump was quoted as saying a merger between Time Warner, or an acquisition of Time Warner by AT&T, would basically put too much power into one particular entity. So it would make them too powerful. It would give them too much control over the market. They would control a lot of pricing. This would reduce competition. It would put the market at a disadvantage. Consumers would be directly affected by it. So what I want to know is, like, what has happened in the last year and a half or 2 years that has changed his tone to where now he's not concerned about this type of acquisition. I'm not really sure. But that's the basis of what the DOJ is trying to investigate and figure out. And I think they're just trying to reveal exactly what was going on during these conversations. So we'll have to wait and see if they get access to those conversations. I'd like to know what was said. I mean, if it wasn't sensitive, then they wouldn't have hit it. If it wasn't important, then they wouldn't have had the white noise being a distractor. So clearly, there were things being said that are relevant and important from the antitrust or the anti-competitive end that implicates this acquisition. Now I'm going to transition over to some T-Mobile and Sprint news. So T-Mobile and Sprint, as it refers to this particular article that I found on Fierce Wireless, it's now publicly known that T-Mobile is not going to be making a joint bid for any type of spectrum that is going to be on auction in the next year. The first set of auctions, I think, is going to be set for November 18th, or November of 2018, which is just a few months away. We're knocking on the footsteps of August here. So within a few months, we're already going to have our first millimeter wave auctions for that frequency of spectrum. And, this is the spectrum that's going to be utilized, all that frequency for the millimeter waves that are used in 5G. So clearly, this is huge future implications for all companies that are going to be investing in the frequencies of the spectrum. So, I think to myself, like, some of the questions that arise from this is, why exactly has T-Mobile made it public that they won't be partaking in the auctioning of the spectrum? Is it, they're just basically saying possibly that they're not doing it jointly with Sprint because there's the possibility that the Sprint merger could fail? Or is it more like they're not interested and they're kind of like hedging all of their bets onto 2.5 gigahertz spectrum from Sprint? I'm not really sure what the case is, but like, it's also possible that they may not be involved in the first auction, but they might be involved in the second auction, which is in 2019. I think it's in, right at the beginning of half two. So, I mean, I have a lot of questions. There's things I would want to know answers to before I speculated as to why T-Mobile made this statement and why they made it public. But I also thought, like, what if they're just hedging everything on the 2.5 gigahertz spectrum from Sprint, and that's all they feel they need to get going? And then I also thought about the rollout of the 600 megahertz band 71 and the 700 megahertz band 66 rollouts and deployments. They could be so financially strapped right now that they're trying to deploy all of that kind of in the sequential steps. They just can't bid on any spectrum at this moment in time. So they may be strapped for the next couple of years, and that's why they're not partaking. But I think it may actually have more to do with restrictions from the FCC and them saying, well, you have this merger pending, and because of that pending deal, you're not going to be able to participate in the auctions, in these first two auctions for the spectrum. So if that's the case, then it makes total sense. Maybe it's a financial move, maybe it's them hedging their bets on the 2.5 gigahertz from Sprint, I don't know. Or it could be all of that, or any of that. So who knows? I mean, I'd like to hear your thoughts and opinions, what you think it is. Maybe you have a better understanding of the situation. That's kind of the way I see it. So let me know, your thoughts and opinions on that. Now, in terms of direct implications to the Sprint and T-Mobile merger, it appears that it's pretty much in place that there's not much resistance that's going to be opposing the merger. Every once in a while I get a question, even till now, even though the merger has been, accepted from the companies for several months, and now we're just going through the technical aspect of it. But people ask me, like, do you really think it's going to go through? And we kind of, this is the most insight we've had in a long time on the merger. Now I'm going to cover a topic video this week that is going to be on Patreon, and it'll be a Patreon exclusive. So check out the Patreon page for the new upcoming video on this particular topic. What it's going to cover is all of the conversations and all of the statements made by the two senators and Marcelo and John about their questioning the antitrust implications as it relates to the merger. So in that meeting, and this is just last week, in that meeting a lot of questions were asked that T-Mobile's representation and Sprint's representation had to answer. And I think it's very telling what the responses and the questions were. So I'm going to spend an entire video on that, but let me give you guys kind of a gist of what happened. So the questions coming from the senators, there were basically two senators asking questions. The subcommittee actually contains 9 senators, and only 2 were present. And I'll touch more on that shortly. So this is why I feel like all the signs from this meeting say that the merger is a go. The first sign, I think, is that the meeting was actually highlighted and promoted, and it was basically expedited and accelerated and pushed up in terms of time. So it wasn't like, oh, we'll get to this in a couple of months. I mean, it was very, very quickly pushed to the forefront to this committee, and they had their questions ready, and they asked the CEOs, and they got their answers. So that's the first thing, is just the expedited nature of this meeting. And the second thing is, of the 9 members of the subcommittee, of those 9 senators that are overseeing the merger as it relates to the court proceedings, there were only 2 present at the start of this meeting. 2 out of the 9. So that just seems like such a small number of senators being involved, almost to say, like, they don't really care too much about this, like, they're perfectly fine with it. So if there was a greater level of concern, I think more than 2 senators would have been present at the start of it. Now, there were a couple more senators that I think came a little bit later, within a couple minutes of the start of it, but I think that shows you the lack of urgency and the lack of concern they have about the merger. So, doing the math, you've got 2 present at the start, and they were the only 2 that really asked questions. And then you got the two that came later who never even spoke or asked anything in particular about the merger. And it almost felt like they were just kind of going through the motions. Like they had questions, the two that were asking, but they weren't really grilling or really questioning in a very like aggressive manner. They weren't trying to probe, Marcelo or John. It was just like surface level questions, and they got their answers with very minimal resistance or response. So I think with 4 out of 9 being present and 2 really only asking questions, I think that's indicative of how this is going to proceed in the future. I think the merger is pretty much a go. Several months ago, when the merger was first announced, I was like 40 to 50% on the side that the merger was going to happen. So like I had my reservations, and they were very strong reservations. I mean, the merger had been approached and presented, in the past, and it never really solidified. So I had my doubts. And then over the course of the last couple months, I've kind of shifted my percentage from like 40 to 50% to like 75 to 80% that the merger is going to happen. So like it just feels like the climate, and it just feels like the sense is that it's going to happen. And I think now after this, and after seeing this, kind of reaction and the questions and the answers that I saw, I feel like it's almost like 90 to 95% probable that the merger is going to happen. That's the first time I've probably used this term. When you say something is probable, you're saying it's likely going to happen. So I feel very confident in saying that the merger is likely going to go through. So I feel confident saying that. I'm not going to beat around the bush. I think it's going to happen. There's going to be more in this meeting in the future, like I said in the video that's going to be on Patreon. So if you're interested in that, definitely check out the Patreon page. I'll be covering the topics and the elements from the actual meeting. I'll be reviewing the questions that were asked. I'll be reviewing the answers and responses from John and Marcelo. I'll also cover the analysis and give you some concluding thoughts on it, because I think it's interesting to know how like what questions were asked, and then how the responses affected, the total outcome of, what was said during the meeting. So, and also, just since I'm talking about Patreon and the upcoming videos on YouTube, this week I'm going to be doing a 5G video, and what I'm going to do for the topics there is I'm going to kind of show the implications of rural America, which is, obviously the minority of the U.S. population, but it's important. There's clearly a coverage gap between rural and urban America, and the video will cover that. And it's also going to talk about the coverage divide between the two segments of the country, as well as kind of cover aspects of the 5G naysayers, those that kind of doubt 5G and don't think it's going to be as impactful early on. And then we'll talk a little bit about the international competition of 5G and the 5G race as it relates specifically to China. And we'll also talk about kind of like the not in my backyard phenomena that seems to occur when it comes to new technologies. So if you're interested in 5G news and you like the concept and the idea of the videos that cover those topics, stay tuned in to the Patreon. There'll be some new videos on that up and coming. And these are just some of the topics that they asked. If you guys want to freeze the video, you can check it out. But I'm going to be doing an in-depth analysis on all of these different questions and topics that were covered during the meeting. So you guys can look forward to that. All right. So what we have now is I'm going to shift the focus from networks and carrier news over to hardware and smartphones. So the Samsung Galaxy S9, for those of you that maybe have owned it, or you currently do own it, or you're thinking about getting it, it's interesting to see that it's already been pretty well known that it's probably one of the worst selling Samsung Galaxy S devices, over the last several years. To be very specific, Samsung has identified it as being the poorest performing Galaxy S since 2012. Now, according to my calculations, I think the Samsung Galaxy line, since it's at 9 and it's 2018, that would mean in 2012 that was the Samsung Galaxy S3, which was a fine phone. I'm not really sure why it was the poorest selling phone in recent history, but this paces even that phone as being the worst selling by the Samsung Galaxy S line. And there's probably a couple reasons for why it hasn't sold very well. The first thing is it's a very iterative update from the Samsung Galaxy S8. If you just look at the front panel or even the back panel of a Samsung Galaxy S8 and an S9, there's very little that you can identify to distinguish the two. They just look so similar. If somebody, and especially like, if you're looking at the front, then you definitely can't tell. But even looking at the back, with the exception of probably maybe the fingerprint scanner placement, you can't tell the difference. So, there wasn't much in terms of innovation that was visible in terms of like design and appearance, and things that were noticeable to distinguish the two. The camera performance is a little bit better. If you were to take a photo, you might be able to tell the difference possibly. I know there's a performance difference in terms of the LTE, like in terms of network speeds and data speeds. So, obviously you've got band 71 support and you've got band 66 support for T-Mobile. Now that's going to be huge. So if you live in an area that has those frequency spectrum available there and the compatibility with the towers, your phone's going to pick up those bands and it's going to fly. So unless you could feel it, you weren't going to tell the difference between the two devices. And I think it's interesting that, people here on this channel would definitely say, well, in most cases, having more bands is better, and it's going to make the performance better. So yeah, I'm in on that upgrade. But to the common user, they have no idea what LTE bands are. They don't know what LTE radios are. So it's not really a concern to them. It'd be hard to sell that to them, if the phones look so similar and, you're going to tell them, well, you're going to have to get out of this 1-year-old phone, which you paid $800 for, get into a new one a year later for $800. So, and I think it's actually because of this that Samsung has forced the issue and pushed up the launch event for the Note 9. And I'll get to that a little bit more in a second. So there's probably a lot of pressure coming from Samsung. They've got a lot of executives and a lot of shareholders, a lot of people within the Samsung business that rely heavily upon the success of the Samsung Galaxy phones. So, pushing up the device cycle, moving the Note 9 up, possibly moving the S10 up in terms of release date makes a lot of sense. But I think that affects, innovation, and I think that affects what features are going to be in those models. So, that pressure is definitely there. Now, if they do accelerate and push up the dates for the launches of the next two devices, that would be the Note 9 and the S10, then there are some implications that we actually care about. So, to kind of conclude on the S8, S9 thing, if you own an S8, and I'm asking you guys out there, if you own an S8, did you really care or think about the S9? Or for any of you out there, did you upgrade from the S8 to S9? I bet you the number is very, very small. And I bet you there's still people out there with S7s and S7 Edges that don't feel the need to upgrade to the S9, and they're probably going to wait for the S10. So we'll have to kind of see, what comes of this. But definitely it's a poor performance from the S9 in terms of sales. And that includes the S9 Plus also. So let's go ahead and get into some Note 9 rumors and leaks and renders. What we have here for the Samsung Galaxy Note 9 is, in terms of pricing, what we're expecting to see. Currently, the rumor is that the phone is going to cost over 1,000 euros. Now, in terms of conversion, euros are obviously more valuable than American currency. So that means that the phone is going to cost over $1,000 here stateside. So in American currency, I think in Germany, the euro conversion for whatever the monetary value in Germany is, they're saying that the device will cost over $1,200 in terms of availability in Germany. So that's a very, very high asking price. That's really, really expensive. We're not really sure exactly what else we can anticipate in terms of cost. We haven't heard any U.S. rumors, but that's what we have from Europe. You guys can see the color of the phone. You can see that on the right, it's like this kind of like rusted brown color, which actually looks kind of nice. You have that classic Samsung blue that we've been seeing for the last couple generations. You could see that the S Pen, if you guys can see there, it's right next to it. It's actually yellow. I think that yellow pen is going to be specific to the blue variant. So the brown phone's probably going to have a brown pen and it'll actually match. So if that matters to you and you're going to get the Note 9, you'll have some options for colors that actually look pretty good. I don't know if they'll have that purple color or not, which we've seen in other Samsung devices in the past, but I'm sure there's going to be at least 3 color options for people. But the last one's probably going to be black because you can see that the pen is black. So that's what we're expecting from colors. In terms of the presentation, when the phone is going to be announced, we're hearing August 9th in London. That's pretty much set in place. We know that for a fact. The market launch date, I believe, is going to be August 24th. and there's going to be some implication of IFA in Berlin this year, which is in August on that date. So we've seen colors. We know about the S Pen. It's going to have Bluetooth integration, which means it's probably going to charge when you actually inject it back into the phone, which is pretty cool. The S Pen's going to be very integrated into the usage of the device. So I'm guessing it's going to be like used as a controller to a certain extent, like with the camera and with music features and stuff like that, which is pretty cool. I think that's going to be kind of the selling point. Also, you know, if you got dual cameras on the back, it's going to have an excellent camera. We'll see what we get for fingerprint display technology. If I'm hearing it's not going to be ready, and that's pretty much in there, so we're probably expecting a fingerprint scanner on the back in the traditional sense. But yeah, we'll just have to kind of wait and see. RAM options, we're hearing 6 gigs of RAM, potentially 8 gigs of RAM, depending on the market and depending on the storage you get. So I think we're probably shifting away from 64 gigs of onboard storage and moving towards 128, especially a phone that's going to exceed $1,000. So expect 128 gigs of base storage, probably expandable with an SD card slot, and there's probably going to be a 256 gig variant. I don't know which markets will have it. I'm hearing rumor of like a Pro variant that's going to have 512 gigs of storage. That's a crazy amount of storage. I mean, that's just a lot. And that would probably drive the price up probably closer to that $1,300 range if it was available. So I don't know if you'd be willing to pay that, but it would be nice to see that kind of an option. So that's kind of what we're seeing there with the Note 9. We're also hearing rumors of a DAX pad. Like the DAX hardware capabilities are going to be compatible in this device. In terms of that, this will give it the ability to connect to a desktop, which is pretty cool. So you're commanding a desktop experience to a monitor using your phone as kind of the brains of the whole operation. So a powerful desktop experience through a phone is awesome. I like the idea. It's going to have a Snapdragon 845, so power is not going to be an issue. So I think that's a pretty cool feature. We're also hearing a 4,000 milliamp hour battery, which I think last year's device was like either 3,400 or 3,500 milliamp hours. I'm not really sure. I forget, but that would be an upgrade. And battery life has to be really good on a Note. It's a large device. Cram in as much battery as you can so the thing will last you, especially when people use these for productivity for the most part. And I'm also hearing of some kind of a Fortnite association, like Fortnite for Android is going to have a 30-day exclusive for the Note 9. That might be enough to entice people to get it, but spending over $1,000 on a phone just for a game that you can get 30 days later after launch, I don't know if I'd be willing to do it. And of course, it's possible that's just a rumor and there's no truth to it. So we'll just have to wait and see. But, let me know your thoughts and opinions on all of that stuff from the Note. I'm also hearing that when you connect that whole DeX experience, that the phone's display kind of serves as like a trackpad, like with a mouse. So that's pretty cool. I kind of like that idea. And the last thing announced with the Note 9 is it looks like there's going to be some new wireless charging pad, which is a new design. It's going to be super fast. It's going to be very low heat generating. So it's going to be an improved iteration of the old wireless technology that people should enjoy. I don't know if it's going to come with the phone or you're going to have to pay for it separate, or if carriers are going to do some kind of bundling, with different features and, like the DeX and all that stuff. We'll have to wait and see, but it's nice to see all this stuff coming out to entice people to want to buy. The last thing I'll leave you guys with from Samsung is, and I'm not going to spend too much time on it, I just thought I'd throw this out there. Apparently, there are still people out there using the Samsung Galaxy Note 7. I don't even know what to say at this point. I mean, Samsung was sending people, heat-proof boxes to put their phones back into these boxes, send them back to them. They were giving people the full refund plus bonuses. They gave people discounts on another device. They put them first in line to order the Note 8 when it became available. They gave people all these incentives to return these phones, but somehow, some way, people have insisted to retain these phones and continue to use them as their daily drivers. And now we're starting to see the battery issues are, no matter what the throttling controls are, the firmware updates, all of that, trying to kill off the phones. There are still just people insisting on running these, and now we're seeing batteries are starting to swell. And of course, this is going to be bad news because when batteries swell, that's where you get fires and explosions. So I think at this point, shame on you if you still have a Note 7 that thing should have been returned a long time ago. You're not taking it out on an airplane. It's basically a bomb waiting to happen. So I don't know what to tell the people with Note 7s at this point. I mean, that is just ridiculous. But moving on. All right, so we have some news. We're going to switch over to Apple. So we've done a little bit with Samsung. In terms of the iPhones, in terms of sales of models, the iPhone 8 Plus was the best-selling iPhone for quarter two of 2018. You think about the devices for the year, for 2018. The phones were actually, they launched like at the end of 2017, but their main selling year is 2018 because it's like, you get about 6 or 7 calendar months of true sale. And then I guess you count into August and whatnot. So you get a nice considerable amount of sales during that year. So what data is suggesting is that for quarter two of 2018, the iPhone 8 Plus was the best-selling model of the 3 newest phones. I think the actual numbers are that the iPhone 8 Plus came in at 24% of sales. The iPhone 10 came in at 17% sales, and the iPhone 8 came in at 13% sales. So there's a clear distinguishing of the 3 models in terms of which ones people bought the most of. So 24, 17, and 8, or 24, 17, and 13%. Now, if you do the math, that means that the 2017 model phones only sold 54% of the iPhones for the year. For the year. Which is kind of weird. That means 46% of the sales came from older phones previous to 2017. So that would be the iPhone 7 and the iPhone 7 Plus. So people are still buying those phones. Now, Apple doesn't necessarily like to see it. I mean, sales are sales, but they're getting more money for the newer phones. So they want to obviously sell 8s and 8 Pluses and 10s, probably more specifically the 10, because they can command more money. So starting at $1,000 versus an 8 Plus, which, sells for a couple $100 less. It's kind of interesting to see that distinction. Now, in 2017, in terms of those models, they accounted for 80% of the sales in 2017. So the iPhone 7 and 7 Plus sold great for their calendar year. The iPhone 10, the iPhone 8 Plus, and the iPhone 8 didn't sell as well for their calendar year. So I think it's just kind of interesting to see what consumers are doing and what they're buying. There's still people interested in the iPhone 7 and 7 Plus, and the iPhone 10 didn't seem to sell like Apple wanted, at least not to their expectations. So thoughts and opinions in the comment section below. I thought that was kind of interesting. All right, so a little bit more news from Apple. This has to do with more of the future generation of iPhones that we're probably going to see this year for 2018. So I think in the case of parts for the Apple iPhone, there's always like rumors and speculation and things that leak, and we kind of take them with a grain of salt, but sometimes there's some truth to them. Qualcomm, which has made an actual official statement, is now saying that they won't be supplying Apple with the chips for their upcoming smartphones for 2018. Now, Qualcomm and Apple have had a previous relationship in terms of business. Apple has been using Qualcomm chips for several generations. So I find this interesting on the heels that Intel is rumored to be not working with Apple, or vice versa, I guess I should say. Apple's not going to be working with Intel beyond, 2019.